Continuing with Valmiki's Ramayana, Balakanda, Chapter 4, Dasaratha and His Grief. There was a country by name Koshala, and on the outskirts of the country flowed the river Sarayu. The land belonged to the Ikshwakus, the descendants of Manu, one of the Prajapatis. Koshala was beautiful, and it was famed for its beauty, the richness of its soil, its luscious greenery, the abundance of its crops, its wealth, and its prosperity. The kings of the solar race, who had always ruled it, were famed the world over for their valor and for their righteousness. The capital of the land of Koshala was Ayodhya. Tradition had it that Manu, the great lawgiver, had created the city. It was a wondrous city with flowering trees and with wide, beautiful roads where the king rode every day. The roads were well laid out, and the royal pathway was ever beautiful with flowers and scented water sprinkled on it all the time. Ayodhya was just like Amaravati, the city of Indra. Ayodhya was ruled by Dasaratha even as Amaravati was by Indra. Dasaratha had earned for himself the name Rajarshi, since he had always been a God-fearing man. He was a wise king. He had charmed his subjects by his good nature. As befitted a scion of the race of Ikshwaku, he had earned the praise of all the many rishis and good people for his prowess, coupled with his gentleness. He had performed all the yagyas which a king had to perform, and he was a king beloved by all. The people were happy and contented. None of them was jealous, and not one was avaricious. They were all rich, and they spoke nothing but the truth. Everyone was wealthy, and everyone was noble. There was no meanness, no lust, and even ugliness was absent. The people were all well read, and no one was an atheist. There was no unhappiness in the mind of even one of them. Such a good king was Dasaratha, the descendant of Ikshwaku. Dasaratha had 8 ministers who were well versed in the art of advising the king in matters of importance. They were highly intelligent, great diplomats, and they were all the time interested in the well-being of their king and his subjects. The ministers were Dhriti, Jayanta, Vijaya, Siddhartha, Arthasadaka, Ashoka, Mantrapala, and Sumantra. The king also had great priests to advise him on matters pertaining to religion and religious rites and rituals. The chief of them were Vashishta and Vamadev. They were great scholars, and they were famed for their learning, for their pride and self-respect, for their self-control, their penance. They were glorious men who had thoughts only for the good of others, the king and his subjects. The king's ministers were so efficient that there was nothing which escaped their notice. They knew about the happenings in all the neighboring countries. The treasury of the king was ever full, and so was his granary. Such a great king, who had everything he could wish for, was not perfectly happy. He had no son to make him happy. The line of the Ikshwakus threatened to terminate with him, since he had no one to succeed him. King Dasaratha was unhappy because of this, and this sorrow ate into his vitals day and night. And as he grew older, his sorrow increased too. One day, while thinking on this, the king thought, "Why should I not perform the yagya by name Ashwamedha? I have been told that it is a rewarding yagya. Perhaps my prayers may be answered if I perform the horse sacrifice." He called for a meeting of his counselors. When they had all come, the king asked them to be seated and sent Sumantra to fetch the rishis who surrounded him during the performance of religious rites. He said, "Sumantra, bring to me the revered gurus, Vashishta, Vamadev, Suyagya, Jabali, Kashyapa, and their disciples too." Within a short while, Sumantra brought all of them to the great council hall. The king received them with all due honor, and after seating them properly, paying attention to their status, the king spoke to them. Surrounded as I am by the wealth of this land and by many beautiful objects of pleasure, still my mind is sorely troubled by sorrow. I have no son, and that makes me unhappy. I feel that the performing of the Ashwamedha may be an answer to my prayers. This is just a thought that has occurred to me. It is up to all of you to weigh it carefully and tell me if I have thought right. They all approved of his suggestion and said, O king, this desire of yours to perform the Ashwamedha for the purpose of continuing the glorious line of the Ikshwakus is indeed commendable. That you should have thought of it is, in itself, a sign that your wishes will be granted. It is but right that we should hasten and make preparations for the yajna to be performed. Let us from now collect the materials for it. The horse should be found. Let the Yagyashala be built on the northern side of the river Sarayu. The king was very pleased with the spontaneous approval of those assembled in the hall. With his eyes wide open with joy, he spoke to his ministers. Take the advice of my acharyas and make all the arrangements. Construct the Yagyashala on the northern banks of Sarayu as has been suggested. All the rituals must be performed properly. Any lapse will cause severe repercussions on all of us. Be very careful to listen to the biddings of the mentors, Vashishta and the others. We will obey you and the great ones, said the ministers, and the great hall emptied itself slowly. There was a strange glow of happiness on the face of the king. Something inside him seemed to assure him that he would be blessed with a son, and with that thought uppermost in his mind, he entered the inner apartments and told his wives about his decision. When he was alone in his chambers, came to the king his charioteer Sumantra. He said, My lord, I remembered suddenly something which I had heard long ago. I thought it but right that I should come to you immediately with the information I have. The news is very ancient, and so it had slipped from my memory till now. But when you spoke of the yajna, I remembered it. Many years ago, the famous rishi by name Sanat Kumar had spoken about the birth of your son in the presence of several rishis. He said, Kashyapa, the revered sage, has a son by name Vibhandaka. He will be the father of Rishyashringa. This son of Vibhandaka will live in the forest with his father. He will not know any other human being, and he will look to his father for the smallest action which he has to perform. He will be innocent in the ways of the world. In course of time, a king will be ruling the country by name Anga. His name will be Romapad. Because of a slight misdeed of the king, his country will suffer. A terrible famine will visit the country of Anga, and the king will ask the advice of holy men as to how he can pacify the gods and bring rain to the country. And the holy men will say, O king, if the son of the sage Vibhandaka is brought to the country, rain will follow in his wake. The young man is called Rishyashringa, and if you bring him to your country and give your daughter Shanta to him in marriage, there will be an end to the dread famine. The king will wonder as to how this can be achieved. He will request his wise ministers and preceptors in the court to go to the forest to bring the young sage. But the anger of Vibhandaka is too well known, and no one will have the courage to go. They will advise the king to send the courtesans of the palace to the forest, and they will succeed where others are afraid to venture. Rishyashringa will, later, preside over a yajna, which will be performed by Dasaratha, and because of this the king will be the father of sons. Sumantra continued, My lord, if you should, with the permission of Guru Vashishta, approach the rishi Rishyashringa and beseech him to perform a yajna for you, the prophecy of Sanat Kumar is certain to come true. Let me assure you that Sanat Kumar has said that you will be the father of 4 sons who will be valiant and who will be famed the world over. Please go to the kingdom of Anga and do not hesitate or delay. End of chapter 4.